When I was a little kid, my dad used to tuck me into bed every night. One stormy evening, the rain was pounding on my window, and I asked him to tell me a really scary story. His face looked uneasy, but he agreed, determined to entertain me. With a tremor in his voice, he began, "Once upon a time, there was a tiny village just like ours. But in that village, there was a chilling legend about a figure called the Shadow Man. He would prowl the woods at night, and if any children stayed up past their bedtime, he'd appear outside their windows." I huddled under the covers, feeling a mix of excitement and concern as my dad continued, "They say the Shadow Man was made of pure darkness, and his eyes glowed like sinister embers. If you made the mistake of meeting his gaze, he'd take control of your mind." I looked up at my dad with wide eyes, sensing something strange in his demeanor. He took a deep breath and went on, "One stormy night, a brave girl named Emily wandered into the forbidden woods. The rain poured and thunder roared, but she couldn't resist seeking out the Shadow Man. She wanted to confront her fears." As he spoke, his hands shook slightly, and I could tell he was getting more and more frightened by the tale he was recounting. Deeper she ventured, until she heard a haunting whisper calling her name. "Emily." It echoed, and her heart pounded in her chest. Suddenly there he was, standing tall with those dreadful glowing eyes. My dad's voice quivered as he described the encounter. Emily tried to run, but she couldn't move, as if some dark force held her in place. The Shadow Man drew closer, and his voice seemed to fill her mind. "You have disobeyed the warnings. Now you belong to me." I clutched my teddy bear tightly, both scared and concerned for my dad. He continued with a sense of urgency. She screamed for help, but it was like no one could hear her cries. She was all alone, and the Shadow Man's grip on her mind tightened. She was trapped. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for something, and he continued in a strained voice. Just when all hope seemed lost, the villagers arrived with torches, their faces filled with terror. The light seemed to drive the Shadow Man away, but the fear still lingered. I felt a pang of sadness seeing my dad so frightened. He concluded the story. Emily was saved, but the Shadow Man's presence haunted her dreams for years to come. And I tell you this, my little one, because we must never underestimate the darkness that can consume us. After that day, my dad was not the same. It was as if he had been possessed that night. I opened my eyes to see an indistinct figure at the foot of my sleeping bag. Panic gripped me, and I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a trick of the shadows. But the figure remained, its gaze fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. Summoning my courage, I whispered to my friends, and they too noticed the apparition lurking in the darkness. Fear united us as we clung to one another, paralyzed by terror. The room felt charged with an otherworldly energy. We mustered the strength to flee the room, seeking refuge in the brightly lit living area. Yet the haunting persisted. Shadows danced on the walls, and disembodied voices echoed throughout the house. Desperate to make sense of it all, we decided to conduct a makeshift spirit communication session, hoping to communicate with whatever spirits lingered. The plan backfired, and the room filled with a sinister presence, causing furniture to move and the walls to groan. In sheer terror, we called off the spirit communication session, realizing that we had inadvertently invited something sinister into our midst. Our laughter from earlier in the night was now a distant memory, replaced by raw fear and regret. With trembling hands, we made a circle and held hands, reciting a prayer of protection we had learned from a random website. Slowly, the haunting seemed to lessen, and the sinister presence dissipated. Exhausted and shaken, we huddled together, waiting for the sun to rise. When morning finally came, the house returned to its usual tranquility. We couldn't believe what we had experienced, questioning our own senses and sanity. To this day, we don't speak of that night often, but when we do, we shiver at the memory of that haunting sleepover, a night that taught us to be careful what we invite into our lives, for the after effects of dabbling in the unknown can be far more horrifying than we ever imagined. Of course, let's replace the word malevolent with sinister. Here's the updated version of the spooky, scary story. Title: The Haunting Sleepover. As the sun dipped below the horizon, my excitement grew as my friends and I prepared for the most epic sleepover of our lives. We had gathered at my house armed with sleeping bags, snacks, and a thirst for adventure. Little did we know that the night ahead would be filled with spine-chilling terror. The atmosphere inside the house felt cozy and warm, but as the darkness outside deepened, an unsettling feeling crept over us. We brushed it off as mere nerves, attributing it to our overactive imaginations. After all, we were here for spooky stories and late-night scares, right? As the night wore on, we gathered around in a circle, eager to share the most haunting tales we could conjure. The wind outside howled, providing the perfect backdrop for our eerie storytelling. Each friend's story was creepier than the last, and with every passing moment, the atmosphere grew heavier. With my heart pounding, I decided to share a personal ghost story. I told them about a previous owner of this very house who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Legend had it that her spirit still roamed the halls, seeking vengeance on anyone who dared to disturb her rest. As I finished my tale, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows and we heard a faint, unexplained whisper. Our laughter ceased and the room fell silent. We exchanged nervous glances, unsure if it was just our imagination playing tricks on us. Trying to shake off the eerie feeling, we decided to indulge in some lighthearted games. But even as we played, strange occurrences began to unfold. Objects shifted inexplicably, and the lights flickered intermittently. One by one, we started hearing peculiar sounds, a soft creaking of floorboards, faint footsteps, and occasional knocks on the walls. We nervously laughed it off, attributing it to old house quirks. But deep down, we couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. As the clock struck midnight, we settled down in our sleeping bags, hoping to find solace in slumber. But as soon as we closed our eyes, the real horror began. Eerie whispers filled the room, and the temperature seemed to drop drastically. One moonlit night, my friends and I decided to have a sleepover at my house. We gathered around the flickering campfire in the backyard, telling scary stories to test our bravery. As the night wore on, my friend Sarah shared a chilling tale about an old abandoned house at the edge of town. It was said to be haunted by the ghost of a young girl who had vanished mysteriously decades ago. Sarah's voice quivered as she recounted the story. She said that on stormy nights, eerie giggles echoed from the empty rooms, and the walls seemed to whisper secrets from the past. The ghostly figure of the girl would appear, her pale face glowing in the darkness. The wind rustled the leaves around us, making us shiver despite the warmth of the fire. We huddled closer, spooked by Sarah's story. Just then, we heard a soft, distant giggle that sent chills down our spines. Nervously laughing it off as our imaginations, we decided to sleep in the safety of the house. But as we lay in our sleeping bags, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Soon, strange noises echoed through the house. Creaking floorboards, muffled whispers, and the sound of footsteps. Heart pounding, I glanced at my friends, their faces mirroring the fear I felt. Terrified, we mustered the courage to investigate the source of the noises. Slowly, we crept down the dark hallway, our flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. As we approached the room at the end of the hall, the air grew icy cold. The door creaked open, revealing a pale figure standing by the window. It was the ghostly girl from Sarah's story. Frozen with fear, we watched as she turned to face us, her hollow eyes piercing through our souls. She reached out, and our flashlights flickered, the room plunging into darkness. In a panicked frenzy, we ran back to our sleeping bags, praying for the morning light to come. Finally, as the first rays of dawn appeared, the ghostly presence faded, and the noises ceased. Exhausted and frightened, we vowed never to speak of that night again. The haunted sleepover became an unforgettable tale, a secret bond between friends who had faced the unknown together.